So, good morning, everyone. My name is Arafat, and I teach history on the textbook platform. So, in this session, let us discuss the previous year questions asked by UPSC from the topic the Vedic Civilization. So, this topic is very, very important. So, at least once in 2 years, UPSC keeps asking questions from this topic. So, let us take a look at the previous year questions asked by UPSC from this topic, that is the Vedic civilization. So I will be discussing this topic in two parts. Today I will be discussing a few of the questions. In the next class, that is in tomorrow's class, I will be discussing few other questions asked by UPSC from this very topic, that is the Vedic civilization. So what is the purpose? The point is, by taking a look at these previous year questions, one, we will get to know where exactly we stand as to how, that is, whether we are able to solve questions or not, we'll definitely get to know. And second, we will be in a position to analyze the areas from which UPSC is asking questions. So the purpose of solving the previous year questions is twofold. One, to see where we exactly stand, whether we are able to solve the previous year questions or not, we'll be able to know. And second, we will uh, in fact get to know the areas from which UPSC is asking. That's my point. So take a look at the first question that was asked way back in 1999. So the Vedic civilization is also referred to as the Aryan civilization. Vedic or Aryan one. So before I proceed, can anyone solve this question, which was asked in 1999? What does the arm what does the term Aryan denote? Was that was the question? Very simple question. What does the term Aryan denote? Anyone? Fine. So basically, the term Aryan, usually we use the term Aryan to refer to people belonging to a certain race. That's a point. But the fact of the matter is, the term Aryan, or for that matter, the term Dravidian, are not ethnic terms. These are not the terms which are used to refer to people belonging to a certain ethnic group. I hope I am clear. So the point is, usually we use the term Aryan and Dravidian to refer to people who belong to an ethnic group. Use the term Aryan to refer to Hindi speaking population of North India, whereas the term Dravidian is used to refer to people living in southern part of India, but we usually use them in the sense of an ethnic group. But the point is, the term Aryan and the term Dravidian are not ethnic terms. They are basically linguistic terms. They are basically linguistic terms. So basically, the term Aryan is used to refer to people who speak a language belonging to the Indo-European language family. Let me repeat this point once again. The term Aryan is a linguistic term, and the term Aryan is used to refer to people who speak a language belonging to the Indo-European language family. So, according to the linguist, uh, there used to be a language family called the Indo-European language family. So many scholars believe that this Indo language family, this Indo-European language speakers, uh, some around 3000 BC, around 3000 BC, got split into two groups. One group migrated and settled in Europe. Another group migrated towards the east and settled in India. Let me repeat this point once again. Who are Aryans? Aryan, I just told you, is a linguistic term. The term Aryan is used to refer to people who speak a language belonging to the Indo-European language family. The group which speaks a language belonging to the Indo-European language. So the linguists say that there used to be a language family called Indo-European language family. So these Indo-European language speakers originally lived in the Central Asia, but the linguists say that these Indo-European language speakers started migrating in two directions. One group migrated towards the west from Central Asia, one group migrated towards the west, settled in Europe, where it developed languages such as Greek and Latin. And scholars say that it is from these Greek and Latin the modern day spoken languages of Europe had come into existence. That's the point. So, on the other hand, we have another group, that is the linguists say that these Indo-European language speakers even started migrating towards the east. So, one group, according to linguists, came and settled in India, and it is this group that settled in India introduced a new language called Sanskrit. So, the point is, it is from Sanskrit. The modern day spoken languages of North India have come into existence. For example, Hindi, Gujarati, Bengali, Marathi, etc., etc. All of these are the languages, including Assamese, etc. All of these happens to be the languages that have come into existence from this Sanskrit. So, who is an Aryan? Term Aryan is a linguistic term. The term Aryan is used to refer to people who speak a language belonging to the Indo-European language family. I hope I am clear. So this question was asked way back in 1999. So uh, the, the the title of chapter is a Vedic or Aryan civilization. We use the term Vedic because it was during so what is the time period of Vedic civilization? It is basically 1500 BC to about 600 BC constitutes the Vedic civilization. So it was during this period, that is between 1500 to 600 BC, that the Vedic literature was composed. Hence, we call this period as Vedic literature. But this Vedic literature was said to have been composed by the Aryans. But who are these Aryans and what is the meaning of the term Aryan? I just explained the meaning of the term Aryan. So Aryan is a linguistic. So of the four options, it is definitely not an ethnic group. It is not a nomadic group. It is not a superior race. Is usually use the term Aryan to refer to people belonging to a particular race. But the term Aryan has nothing to do with race. Term Aryan is a speech group, is a linguistic group. Point. So the answer for this question is options. I hope this point is clear to you all. So this question was asked way back in 1999. This topic remains very, very important. You all should know what actually we mean by when we use the term Aryan. Aryan is basically speech group. Take a look at the second question. This is also a very important topic. So this question was asked way back in 1996, 30 years ago. This was asked. Take a look at this question. The river mentioned most, the topic here is most in early Vedic literature is, four options are given. So here the key point is most. The second is early Vedic literature. So basically, the question is asking us to identify the name of the river that was mentioned most number of times in the early Vedic literature. What do we mean by early Vedic literature? So basically, we study the Vedic literature in two parts. We study the Vedic literature in two parts. we study the Vedic literature in two parts. One is we have the early Vedic literature. Second is the later Vedic literature. Early Vedic and the later Vedic. Early Vedic is between 1500 BC to 1000, what we call as early Vedic literature. Later Vedic is between 1000 BC to 600 BC is what we call as a later Vedic literature. That's the point. So early Vedic, later Vedic, these are the time periods. During the early Vedic period, only Rig Veda was composed, whereas the rest of the Vedic literature was composed during the later Vedic period. During early Vedic period, only one book was composed, that is Rig Veda, whereas the rest of the Vedic literature was composed during the later Vedic period. I hope I am clear. So when we use the term early Vedic, when we use the term early Vedic literature, we are in fact referring to Rig Veda only. So the question is asking us to identify the name of the river that was mentioned the most number of times in Rig Veda. The name of the river that was mentioned most of the times in Rig Veda. So Pandey says is C. C is the answer. So there is a distinction between, undoubtedly in Rig Veda get numerous references to the river Saraswati. In Rig Veda, we do get numerous references to Saraswati. In fact, if there is one river which is praised a lot in Rig Veda, that river is undoubtedly river Saraswati. If there is one river which is praised very much in Rig Veda, that river has to be river Saraswati. So for example, in Rig Veda, there are slokas in which river Saraswati was referred to as Ambi Tame, Debi Tame. So basically, in Rig Veda, river Saraswati was praised very much. River Saraswati was referred to as Ambi Tame, Debi Tame. That is, uh, it was praised so much in Rig Veda. But the question here is the river most mentioned most in early Vedic literature. Which river is mentioned most number of times? That is the question. So the answer for this question is river Sindhu or river Indus. The answer for this question is river Sindhu or river Indus. Question. The point. So when it comes to the frequency of appearance of Sindhu, the frequency of appearance of Sindhu in Rig Veda is more when compared to river Saraswati. I'm not saying that river Saraswati was not mentioned. It was definitely mentioned, but river Saraswati was praised a lot in Rig Veda. But when it comes to the number of times Sindhu was mentioned, is undoubtedly more when compared to the number of times river Saraswati was mentioned in Rig Veda. The answer for this question is river Sindhu. How about Shutudri? Shutudri is also mentioned in Rig Veda, but only a few number of times. Shutudri is basically Satlaj. Is basically river Satlaj. Basically Satlaj. So Shutudri is also mentioned, but it is mentioned only a few number of times. So of all the rivers, if there is one river that is mentioned the largest number of times, the river has to be river Sindhu. How about Ganga? Ganga is not at all mentioned in Rig Veda. River Ganga is not mentioned in Rig Veda because the early Vedic Aryans mostly lived in northwest part of the Indian subcontinent. That is, the early Vedic Aryans lived in mostly say present day Punjab, Haryana, to to some extent to western part of Uttar Pradesh, but they mostly lived in the western part of the northwest part of the Indian subcontinent. So the early Vedic Aryans did not cross River Yamuna. They lived only to the west of River Yamuna, not to its east. So therefore, we don't find any reference to River Ganga in Rig Veda. But what is mentioned in Rig Veda is a lot of praise for Saraswati was definitely there. But River Sindhu was mentioned largest number of times in Rig Veda. Shrutudri is also mentioned, but the question is most. Answer for this question is answer A is the right answer. I hope you all have understood this question. Then this is also a very important topic which we keep discussing in the class. So take a look at this question. Who among the following was a Brahmavadini who composed some hymns of Vedas? Now here you have to know the meaning of the term Brahmavadini so that you can actually correctly identify the answer. Any guess or answer for this question? Who among the following was a Brahmavadini who composed some hymns of the Vedas? Any answer for this question? Who among the following was a Brahmavadini who composed some hymns? Hymns, in other terms, these are the shlokas. The shlokas of Vedas. B. Gargi. B. Uh, the point is Brahmavadini. It is true. Gargi is what is Brahmavadini, by the way? Brahmavadini is a woman philosopher. Woman philosopher or woman scholars during the ancient times, women scholars or women philosophers during the ancient times were referred to as Brahmavadini. It's true that Gargi is was referred to as a Brahmavadini, but here the question is who among the following was a Brahmavadini? Second part of the question is who composed some hymns of Vedas. That is the point. Hymns, some shlokas of the Vedas. Gargi is definitely a Brahmavadini, but we do not have any proof to suggest that Gargi composed some hymns of the Vedas. You know, undoubtedly, Gargi, very great, in fact, the first woman philosopher of India, undoubtedly. But here the point is, she is not identified as someone who composed the hymns or shlokas of the Vedas. That's the point. But here the point is, there are two parts of the question here. Who among the following is a Brahmavadini? Plus, who composed some hymns of the Vedas? So, in Rig Veda itself mentions the names of a few women uh, who are said to have composed, some shlokas of Rig Veda. For example, Rig Veda itself mentions uh, Swayamvara, the point, Gosha, Vishwavara, Lopamudra as some of the women scholars who are said to have composed some 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 shlokas of Rig Veda. So Rig Veda itself mentions Rig Veda itself contains the names of a few women who are said to have composed the shlokas of Rig Veda. Rig Veda mentions the names of women scholars such as Swayamvara, Ghosha, Vishwavara, Lopamudra, etc. I hope I am clear. So Rigveda does not mention the name of Gargi. Gargi is a philosopher, woman scholar, but she is not identified as someone who composed the shlokas of Rigveda. The point. So the answer for this question is Lopamudra. So all of these are basically the names, the four names which I suggested here. They are considered to be very important women scholars of the Vedic time period. These four women are said to have composed a few slokas of Veda, and hence they were referred to as Brahmavadini. Brahmavadini, in simple terms, means, so the answer for this question is Lopamudra. So this is also very important to remember the meaning of the term Brahmavadini, and you also remember the names of women scholars of Veda. Then this is also a very important topic which class this was asked way back in 1993. So during the Rig Vedic period, the word Nishka was used for jewelry, but in a later period, it was used for the meaning of. So basically, the question is asking us to identify what does Nishka mean. Any answer? Any answer for this question? During the Rig Vedic period, word Nishka was used for jewelry, but in a later period, it was used for the meaning of. What does Nishka mean? Question. What is Nishka? What does Nishka mean? Any other? So the answer for this question is undoubtedly option C. At a point. So let us try and have some understanding of this particular topic. So in Rigveda, we frequently come across a term called Suvarna Nishka. In Rigveda, frequently come across a term called Suvarna Nishka. And this term was used in the context of exchange of goods. Exchange of goods. Point is, in Rigveda, we have numerous references to the term called Suvarna Nishka. But in what context was this term used? This term was used in the context of exchange of goods. The context of exchange of goods. So therefore, some scholars believed that Suvarna basically means gold. Nishka, in course of time, began to be referred to as coins. Basically, coins in course of time began to be referred to as Nishka. So the use of the term Suvarna Nishka in Rigveda made some scholars believe that possibly gold coins were used during Rigvedic time period as a means of exchange. Let me repeat this point. Listen this carefully. The point is, we frequently come across the term called Suvarna Nishka in Rigveda, but the term Suvarna Nishka was used in the context of exchange of goods. That is, it was mentioned when exchange of goods taking place at that time, the term Suvarna Nishka is said to have been given by individuals, and in exchange, individuals are said to have purchased the goods of their choice. So, therefore, some scholars in fact argued that Suvarna Nishka was possibly a coin used as a means of exchange. The point is, some scholars argued that possibly Suvarna Nishka was a coin used as a means of exchange during the Rigvedic time period only. But now, most of the scholars believe that the use of coins in India began in 600 BC. The use of coins in India began in BC, and scholars believe that the use of gold coins in India began only in the 1st century AD. So the point is, Rigvedic period is between 1500 to 6. Rigvedic period is 150 to 1000 BC. So during the Rigvedic period, most of the scholars believe no coins were used, but possibly scholars believe that this Suvarna Nishka was possibly gold ornament with a fixed value. So using gold ornament is one thing as a means of exchange, and using gold coins is another thing as a means of exchange. The question is about what is Nishka, which was basically jewelry used during the early Vedic period. Is Let me repeat this point. So in Rig Veda, there is a frequent mention of the term Suvarna Nishka. Suvarna means gold, Nishka means coin. And therefore, some scholars argued that gold coins were used for means of exchange during early Vedic period itself. But now, most of the scholars believe that the use of gold coins began in the first century AD. They began in the first century AD. So therefore, most of the scholars believe that the term Suvarnandishka mentioned in Rigveda was perhaps not a coin, was perhaps just a jewelry that was perhaps also used as a means of exchange. But Nishka, that is the coins as a means of exchange began much later time period, not during the early Vedic time. I hope I am clear. So the whole point which I'm trying to convey is during early Vedic period, there was absolutely no coins that were used as a means of exchange. They began to be used in course of time. That is from around first century AD onwards, they began to be used. And those coins were also referred to as Nishka only. So do not get confused here. During the early Vedic period, the word Nishka was used to refer to jewelry. That is definitely. But during the later Vedic period, the same word began to be used for a different meaning. That is, it began to be used to refer to coins. It began to be used to refer to coins. So, what is Nishka? Nishka means coin. Good point. And particularly, Suvarna Nishka means gold coin. So, the answer for this question is option D. Take a look at the fifth question. Take a look at the fifth question. So this is about the religion of the early Vedic Aryans. So this was asked in 2012. The religion of early Vedic Aryans was primarily of. What's the answer? Anyone? The religion of early Vedic Aryans was primarily of. Anyone? The religion of early Vedic Aryans was primarily of. This is basically on the religious practices of the early Vedic Aryans. Hmm. Any other? So, to both of you, Pakshi, Pandey, both of you have answered the correct. So basically, let us understand these four options given in this particular question. So what is basically, before we answer this question, let us understand the nature of the religious practice during the early Vedic period. So during the early Vedic period, people worshipped the nature forces, or say natural forces. So in Rigveda, there is a mention of altogether 33 gods and goddesses. All these 33 gods and goddesses happen to be the nature forces or natural forces. For example, sun, Agni, wind, rain, earth, etc. etc. Let me repeat this point once again. In Rigveda, there is a mention of a total of 33 gods and goddesses. And all these gods and goddesses happen to be uh, nature forces, like say sun, like say earth, wind, rain, storm, at a point, sunrise, etc. So these nature forces were also given a gender. Usually, the aggressive nature forces, the aggressive forces were given uh, a masculine gender, whereas the benign, peaceful nature forces were given a feminine gender. Say, for example, aggressive force like say Agni was given gender of a male gender, that is a masculine gender, whereas peaceful forces like say Earth, they were given feminine gender. So the point is, what is bhakti then? So basically, during the early Vedic period, nature forces were worshipped. So of the four options given here, in option 3, that is option C and option 4, we have the worship of nature, that is true. But in option 4, we also have bhakti at a point. But in nature, in option C, yajnas are mentioned at a point. In option B, image worship is basically image worship was introduced in India only in the first century AD. The image worship began in India in the first century, roughly at that point of time. But early Vedic period is between 1500 to 1000. So therefore, option B can be easily ruled out because image worship did not exist during early Vedic period. So therefore, this can be easily ruled out from our options. Then what about bhakti? Take a look at this term bhakti. Bhakti is unconditional self surrender to God. Bhakti, that is, you pray to God, you devote yourself to God, but without having any kind of expectations from Him. That is, you do not put any demands before the God. You do not, you do not, you put only one demand. That is, you pray to God with the object of achieving moksha, but you don't put forward any material demands before the gods. That is, you don't demand God for any material things. That's the point. So the point is, bhakti is an unconditional self surrender to God. Is bhakti as a method of worship? Bhakti element in worship, according to most scholars, emerged during the later Vedic period. That is, from 600 BC onwards, this aspect began to be seen in the worship of God. That is, during the later Vedic period, bhakti as a method of worship emerged. So, most scholars believe that during the early Vedic period, the prayers to the god were mostly for material benefits. Point is, the people of the early Vedic period prayed to the gods for material benefits. They prayed to the god. Uh, they prayed to the god for material benefits like praja, pashu, etc., etc. So pray to the gods for the welfare of praja. They pray to the god for for uh, for granting them with more cattle. They pray to the god for bountiful produce, etc., etc. So the whole point is, the prayers during the early Vedic period were for material benefits. At a point. So therefore, bhakti as a method of worship during bhakti as a method of worship did not exist during the early period. So therefore, option A can be ruled out. Similarly, there was absolutely no image worship during the early Vedic period. Therefore, it can also be ruled out. So take a look at option D. Bhakti, I told you, bhakti emerged during the later Vedic period. So therefore, option C can also be ruled out. So what remains here is option C only. So there was a worship of nature, that is, nature forces were worshipped, and at the same time, people worshipped the gods by performing yagnas. By how did people definitely worshipped nature forces, but how was the prayers offered? Prayers were offered by performing yagnas at a point. So yagnas were performed as a method of worshipping of God. So the answer for this question Options not D, not B, not A. Is this point clear to everyone? So kindly remember, people worshipped nature forces. People performed yagnas as a method of worshipping of God. Bhakti as a method of worship emerged during the later Vedic period. So that's all for today. We will meet in the next class to take up discussion on some more questions asked from the same topic, that is the Vedic civilization. Fine. So that's all for today. See you in the next.